It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. With me is Larry Bernard. How you doing, Larry?
Doing great, doing great. Looking forward to talking about some Star Wars.
Yes, Star Wars.
70% second weekend drop for Solo, a Star Wars story. It's a shame the movie doesn't deserve that bad of a hit, but couldn't happen to nicer people.
Yeah. Variety reports Solo box office plummets to $29 million the second weekend. Yeah.
So for anybody who's watching this who isn't super into movies, when you hear the box office figures, 100% of that money doesn't go to Disney. For the U.S. box office, it's something in the neighborhood of like 60%, give or take. And for the foreign box office, like 40% in the U.S. and a little higher in certain foreign markets. But it's a little weird. But there's no way this movie's making its money back off of just the theater showing. It's mathematically impossible at this point.
Yeah, and that's interesting because Screen Rant reports Star Wars, a Star Wars story probably won't break even at the box office. That means it's going to lose money. And just to give you
I wonder, when you make a movie cost twice as much as you originally budgeted, if that could somehow impact how much money it's going to lose. Oh, it's weird.
Yeah, and so if you take a look, as of June 3rd, today, the domestic total is 148.89 million, rounded up. Foreign is 115 million. So worldwide, it has brought in so far 264.18 million. So yeah, this is not good.
They're going to have to sell a lot of DVDs to get this to make its money back. And they're probably going to do what they did with Ghostbusters 2016. They're probably going to cram in a lot of Denny's coupons with these Solo DVDs.
Probably. So disappointing box office debut. Disney executive responds. And yeah, there's questions as to whether it was harmed by its release on the heels of two other blockbusters, those being
here's
Deadpool
the thing.
2 and Avengers Infinity War, which, if you think about it, is also by Disney. So basically, Disney is competing with itself right now.
Avengers moved up so it wouldn't hurt Solo on the back end.
And yet Avengers is still hanging around in theaters and therefore still competing.
But Deadpool moved closer, which gets really interesting when you're looking at the whole Fox-Disney merger drama going on. And nobody knows why Deadpool moved closer. It's possible Fox management wanted to punch Solo in the face, but I don't understand why they would do that. So there's weird things going on with this movie.
Yeah,
it was a fine movie. It wasn't great. It wasn't good. It was okay.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem is that, unlike The Last Jedi, which was just plain awful and polarized a lot of fans, Solo has the potentially worse fate of being merely mediocre as opposed to just downright horrible. And actually, I kind of give credit to Ron Howard, who was brought in late during the production to replace Lord and Miller, who were the original directors. But they basically had to start over from scratch. And the question going through my mind right now is, if they had to essentially reshoot the entire movie under Ron Howard, because what Lord and Miller shot was just unusable, could they not have just gone ahead and said, okay, you know what? We're going to go ahead and get a whole new screenplay here and whip that up. And even if it's not up to par, but we'll still have something that's better than what Lord and Miller started with.
But if you think about the voodoo alchemy of these big tentpole blockbuster event movies, they all are produced for somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 to 175 million. There are a couple of outliers at 200 million, but that's for things like Avengers Infinity War level, The Force Awakens level, things that you know are going to have a big payday on the back end, as well as on the front end. So there's no way that you make that decision, say, okay, we're basically going to double the cost of making this movie. You're not going to make your money back. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. And,
so if you're going to lose money with the Lord and Miller cut. Don't put your studio's reputation on the line of saying, well, we're going to salvage it. We're going to double down on this movie. We're going to make it so costly that it can't make a profit. It makes you look like you don't know what you're doing.
Right, which, frankly, people got onto that pretty early on, I think right about the time The Force Awakens was released, but it only got solidified once The Last Jedi was released. So, but the Hollywood Reporter, let me go ahead and bring up the link. But yeah, Disney's really having to rethink its strategy here, because it going forward, there's really not a whole lot of wiggle room going forward here. But Disney is basically acknowledging that, yeah, this is gone completely off the rails with the franchise, and we have to kind of step back and reevaluate and figure out what's going on. And that's interesting because
just pause for a second.
Sure. Yeah, so what really gets me is, like, is Bob Iger finally going to call Kathleen Kennedy into his office and say, look, you're going to be replaced here as head of Lucasfilm because you're just not doing the job.
I'm
I'm
one of the people who don't like the artistic direction Lucasfilm is choosing to go with these movies, but if you think about it dollars and cents business-wise, The Last Jedi was not well received, and to pull off one of these kind of movies, you need a good lead-in from the prior movie. Or at the very least, you don't need a negative lead-in from the prior movie.
Yeah, and it's like, the whole basis for this movie focused on a pair of dice that was introduced in The Last Jedi, where Luke inexplicably brings out this pair of dice from nowhere to give to Leia, and we don't know why, because, well, there's never in any of the previous Star Wars movies been any hint that Han Solo owned a pair of golden dice, so why does he give this thing to Leia? And so they just decide, oh, we're going to make a whole movie, centered around that pair of dice.
Also, the fuel, which is the major plot point element of the movie, was overstealing spaceship fuel, which wasn't a major issue in Star Wars movies until The Last Jedi.
All right. Well, it actually kind of makes sense. That's one thing I actually don't have a complaint about with Star Wars with regards to fuel, because one assumes that they must have some kind of like reactor or fuel source for their ships that must at some point be replenished. But they're hyping it to a point that really just kind of breaks suspension of disbelief, because none of this was really relevant in the previous two trilogies, and now all of a sudden it's important. Well, okay, fine, but you're gonna lose a lot of people, because now all of a sudden people who watch the first two trilogies are going, what the fuck? This was never a problem before.
And back to my point was, bad lead-in movie. A decision was made to put one out 6 months later, which that may not be Lucas's decision, but 6 months isn't enough time to build the hype train you need for a successful cash payout on one of these kind of movies. There's the firing of Lord Miller. There's the drama with what's-his-face, who's the director from Rogue One. There was the firing of the director who was going to direct Episode 9. And it's bad management at the top of Lucasfilm, and all of these decisions are fundamentally on Kathleen Kennedy's head.
Yeah, I was watching World Class Bullshitters video over the weekend on Solo a Star Wars Story, and they were talking about how Steven Spielberg at once described Kathleen Kennedy basically as someone who sat in on meetings and threw out the occasional idea, but otherwise wasn't very good at her job. And that was back when she was when Spielberg was working on Jaws. But that's so why would someone give this person the head position at Lucasfilm if she was never good at her job? I mean, hell, do you ever see, for example, Gail Ann Hurd, who was James Cameron's longtime collaborator. Because she produced his films, and right now I think it's doing The Walking Dead, heading that up, and also helped launch MCU. So.
Yeah.
If you're going to put anyone in charge of Lucasfilm, Gail Ann Hurd seems to me to be the logical choice because she's got the sort of chops to do this. Whereas Kathleen Kennedy, it's like, who did she suck up to in order to get this position?
Well, it was Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, obviously, is who she sucked up to. And George trusted her because she's been that woman in the background the whole time.
Yeah, but clearly not telling him what he needs to hear, because honestly, the prequels, I mean, they weren't, in my opinion, they weren't as awful as the current crop of movies, but they were still, pretty mediocre.
The prequels had their own problems, and there are actually people behind the scenes telling George things like, Jar Jar Binks is probably going to come off just a little racist, George. Maybe we should rethink this idea. But...
Yeah, and he actually stepped back with that and, gave him a smaller and smaller part in each succeeding movie.
Yeah.
So
but the bigger issue is if you're Bob Iger and I forgot the name of the guy who's the head of Disney Films. Somebody needs to be the public face of the Star Wars brand. And Lucasfilm also should diversify beyond the Star Wars brand because they have some other good IP, especially from their video games that they could start to develop.
Yeah, because they do have Pixar. They've got their live action version, because I guess they're doing live action reboots now all of a sudden of all their animated.
But whoever becomes the new face of the Star Wars franchise needs to be somebody who can. You're not going to totally be able to patch over all the differences between people, but somebody who needs to say, "Here's a product that if you like the prequels, you're going to like this. If you like the original movies, you're going to like this, and if you like these Disney movies, you're also going to like this."
Yeah, except nobody likes the Disney movies. That's the problem.
But yeah, there needs to be some guy or girl who's going to be that face of the franchise who can sell the product. That's what they need right now. They probably need a second person to be responsible for managing the artistic vision, because that seems to be the area where the Lucas Story Group seems much more interested in the books and the comic books than the movies. And I like the books and comic books as much as the next person, but that's not where the money is. That's not where the credibility is. That's not where the big cash is. Disney wants people to have good, warm Star Wars feelings so they can go to the Star Wars Land theme park that they're building. And then they'll build a second Star Wars theme park. And they'll build hotels at the 2 Disney locations that are entirely Star Wars themed. That's the big payday for Disney. I mean, these movies are going to make Disney a ton of money, but that's the big cash cow Disney is building towards.
Right. Well, I don't see how they're going to do it, considering the movies are actually starting to lose money now. I mean, yeah, because The Last Jedi fell short of what it needed to get the kind of return that Disney needs in order to invest in all those theme parks and hotels and everything else.
And the most
money.
And the other real recent example of somebody messing up this badly, you have to go back to like Amy Pascal over at Sony when she completely screwed over the Spider-Man franchise. But at least Amy had the integrity to stand up and say, okay, we need to call in Kevin Feige and the Marvel team here to fix this mess. We need to own up to the fact that we're not going to get these movies right.
Yeah. And, especially, with regards to Sony, there's at least a little bit more willingness, not consistent, but a little bit more willingness to admit when they screwed up. That's why there's probably not going to be a Ghostbusters 2, at least nothing directed by Paul Feig.
Yeah. And, of
course, there probably shouldn't have been a Ghostbusters 1 by Paul Feig, but, that's that damage is done. But,
Now, I actually saw an interesting video done by Wisecrack on YouTube where it talked about how The Last Jedi, the new God of War video game, and the movie Logan are all like anti-Westerns, but for the basically superhero genre. They're all anti-heroic movies. And I'm really not sure anti-heroic movies is the business Disney wants to be in.
Yeah, because anti-heroic movies work for Clint Eastwood, but then again, you had
Yeah.
you had Sergio. He's just doing all those spaghetti westerns. These were guys who actually knew the genre and knew the films that they were deconstructing before they went ahead and set pen to paper.
But now we're getting the guy who did Logan to do a Boba Fett movie.
Which, again, is there really a demand for a Boba Fett movie, especially after nobody asked for a Han Solo movie, got settled with a mediocre one, and really, I'm kind of worried. Why is Disney pursuing this model where they're like churning movies out like on a factory conveyor belt? I mean, the two George Lucas helmed trilogies took place. I mean, they're actually made literally 20 years apart. You had Star Wars released in 1977. Then you had The Phantom Menace released in 1999. So, yeah, about 22 years in between.
George basically thought of these movies as generational events.
Right. And Disney is trying to apply, MCU standards, which you really can't do. Star Wars is not set up for that. So, honestly, I don't see how they're going to do it.
It could be if they would be willing to do something with the extended universe properties, but I hear tale that some of those contracts George had people sign might not be as ironclad as Disney would want them to be.
Yeah, and that's that's opening up a whole other kettle of fish.
And Timothy Zahn, for example, he's being delayed on doing some books he's already signed contracts for about Thrawn, because how Thrawn's going to start interacting with new Disney properties that are going to roll out. He also created Mara Jade, and he has basically told the fans at some fan conventions she's probably never coming back into the mainstream of canon, which is kind of a shame.
Yeah, and that's pretty much Ruin Johnson's fault, because he decided, we're going to kill off Luke Skywalker, we're going to kill off Han Solo, we're going to kill off Leia at some point, but Carrie Fisher died, so
she has the mercy of not having her character ruined in the final of these movies.
Too late.
Yeah,
Mary Poppins in space. I mean, that's just like I said. That's the stuff that breaks suspension of disbelief, and that really kind of diminished the character, because if anyone, I mean, basically, they didn't even need Admiral Holdo in The Last Jedi. They could have just had Carrie Fisher do the Admiral Holdo role if they were going to kill her off. But they decided, we're going to have this whole other character with a whole other actress and waste however much money they paid to Laura Dern for her scenes.
My theory is that Carrie Fisher wasn't well enough to do that much of a commitment on the movie.
Yeah, because from what I understand, she was actually using again, like cocaine or something, and
so that's why I think Admiral Holdo was invented, was so she could fill in what Carrie Fisher wasn't capable of doing anymore.
Yeah, and that that's actually one of the things that really I think is tragic, because here you've got someone she's got a history of drug abuse and fame. The stresses and pressures of having to get famous again, that's going to drive even people who started off sober to maybe start using drugs or alcohol. I remember when Robin Williams passed away back in 2014 now.
Yeah.
He had actually entered into rehab not long before, because he hadn't started using again, but he was at a point where he was afraid he might. And so that was a similar dynamic, I think, with Carrie Fisher, except she started using again, and it put too much strain on her already overtaxed heart, and the rest is history. But
I don't see how Kathleen Kennedy pulls this off, because that's going to put too many stakes onto to be named later J.J. Abrams sequel Star Wars. And if that movie doesn't hit it out of the park, she's going to get fired.
Well, honestly, at this point, I'm wondering if she's going to get fired before Episode 9, because at this point, with The Last Jedi, again, having caused so much controversy and not having made quite the money. I mean, Disney is still spinning it as a massive success, which it's not. But in corporate world, the appearance of success is more important than whether you actually did succeed. And in this case with Solo, they cannot keep pretending anymore.
No.
And now they're having to face the real possibility that, episode 9 might not actually work, and that it might actually kill any chances of another trilogy or even completing the rest of the franchise, because they've been planning trilogies, ad infinitum.
Like they're the DC Extended Universe.
Right, which, look how that turned out. It's like, guys, you've got Kevin Feige. Even if he's busy running Marvel, at least ask him for advice.
I mean, the rumor is Kevin Feige is going to retire from running Marvel. The only way I think she keeps her job right now is if Disney can't find somebody who can take over that position. It's like having a bad coach on a bad team, but there isn't a good coach to hire, so there's no point in firing the bad coach because nobody else could have done anything better.
Yeah, and that brings to mind, because how many people could actually do that? There's Kevin Feige over at Marvel. If he decides to go from Marvel to Lucasfilm to try and maybe reboot Star Wars, one hopes. Or you can get Gale Ann Hurd because I think isn't The Walking Dead winding down now?
It's winding down, yeah.
Right. So I mean, there's still time to bring in Gale Ann Hurd if they can give her a big enough paycheck. But
Jon Favreau's doing a TV series, and he's a very smart guy. He has a lot of good ideas for this sort of thing, and he was also there at the beginning of the MCU.
Right. Although I will say this, if they bring in Stephen Moffat, then that's pretty much it for Disney. Because it'll become all about Rey, who is the biggest component in the universe. Wait a minute, they've already done that. Never mind. Too late.
But yeah, the only way I think she keeps her job right now is if Disney can't find a suitable replacement. And whoever they replace her with has to be somebody who can go to the fans at the next Star Wars celebration says, we've messed up. We've not given you the experience you want out of these movies, out of these tie-in products. We've had Solo tied in Solo cups, and that's tacky, and that shouldn't be what Star Wars is about. We hear you. We're sorry. We're going to do better.
Right, and that's actually more or less what Disney has been saying now.
Yeah, but there needs to be somebody internal to Lucas's leadership that takes ownership of that.
Yeah, and this is creating a really interesting conundrum because at this point, because Harrison Ford won't come back.
No, he wanted to be gone.
He's already in his 70s. Mark Hamill, he's in his 60s. So
also, the whole experience with The Last Jedi has clearly left him a little sour.
Yeah, and I mean, I still remember watching the video of him at the premiere sitting next to Ruin Johnson and looking like
the life is all drained out of him.
Yeah, it's basic. Well, that was at first. It's like at first he was sitting there stunned, like, what the hell did he do? And then he's looking at Johnson like, you son of a bitch. I mean, if there wasn't like 100 people, like 500 people in this theater right now, I would force choke you to death. I mean, that's...
And Colin, what's his face, the guy who was supposed to do episode 9, he's had all sorts of, what people are interpreting as subtle backhands towards Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson on Twitter by doing Twitter posts about his son's first movie.
Yeah, and
make some weird comments that people are interpreting as coded. But what I like he said that was classy is he's not happy, and he feels the more that this comes out in the public, it makes people think of Star Wars as just movies, and it's really more than that. But that he'll always treasure the fact that he got to tell his story to George Lucas and Mark Hamill. And that's something that he'll carry with him the rest of his life.
Yeah, and bringing Jar Jar Abrams back to do episode 9, that's pretty much like bringing in the guy who helped break it in the first place.
He's only finished one thing in his entire career. He's always started projects but never finished it. So he knows his own reputation, so that can make this even more of a gamble of a movie.
Right. I mean, how are you going to finish something that Ruin Johnson pretty much already finished because he wanted to make his new trilogy and didn't have the patience to go ahead and stick around. It's like, hello, Ruin, you forgot there's still one more movie in this trilogy?
Yeah.
So, I mean, at this point, I don't see how Star Wars survives at this point, because they've got really an impossible task now, because now they're Lucasfilm is a company that loses money on Star Wars movies.
I think,
and they're not going to resurrect it with Jar Jar Abrams at the helm, trying to finish up something that was already finished in the previous movie. So, to me, if they don't start off with a completely new screenplay and a completely new director, I don't see us getting any more Star Wars for at least another generation, which, may not be such a bad thing. But, I'm already 44. I don't want to have to wait, until I'm 64 or 70, when I'm on my deathbed to go see it.
But I think no matter what, I think after Episode 9 comes out, they're going to axe the Rian Johnson trilogy, and they're going to axe the Game of Thrones trilogy. I think both of those right now are at a stage where the studio can completely scrap those, and nothing bad will happen. I think they will probably do a Boba Fett movie because he's such a popular character. They think there's a good chance that will play out into a good movie.
Yeah, but again, they need an actual screenplay. They can't go by this checklist of stuff they want to happen and then try and shoot scenes around it and wrap a narrative around it.
And they will
start with the narrative first, then build the scenes for the narrative.
And they will probably do a Lando movie. They will probably get in some talented black director. Hopefully not the lady who did A Wrinkle in Time, because she's terrible. She's good for documentary.
Possibly Ryan Coogler to direct a Lando movie, but again, is there really a demand for a Lando Calrissian movie? Especially after Solo and the way they handled Lando, which caused nothing but controversy.
But I think they could make a business case for a Lando movie. But after those two movies, really an open question what Disney is willing to do. Are they willing to take a gamble? Are they willing to backtrack on the Lucas strategic plan to abandon the extended universe? Well,
it seems to me they've already taken plenty of gambles that have so far really not paid off.
But these aren't like gambles to their mindset of thinking like, we're going to do a movie about the very beginning of the Jedi-Sith conflict eons ago, something that was only touched on in one comic book that barely anybody read, about when the Jedi and Sith were one family and about the fight that led to them breaking up. That's going to be a huge gamble. There's going to be a certain audience for it that says, it's got Star Wars on the label, I'm going to go see it. But that's not going to be a big budget tentpole audience. That's going to be a very niche audience. So for Disney to do something like that, that's a risk.
Yeah, and if there's one thing we know about corporations, especially Hollywood corporations, they are risk averse. And at this point, Disney has taken its risks, but those risks have not paid off. So,
I mean, doing something like Darth Revan, because his series from the video games is very popular, that would be a mild to moderate risk so far as Disney would be seeing. Now, if they had the right actor to play the part, who that was something he was extremely passionate in, and they could maybe get some buy-in on his contract, that might be something they would be willing to do in that kind of scenario. But again, I don't know what their contract with BioWare was like in Obsidian, so they may not have, full 100% clear ownership rights to some of those creative properties.
Yeah, and that again goes to the problems with the extended universe, because much like in British media, copyrights basically remain with the person who actually created a character or story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, every time Doctor Who brings in the Daleks, they have to pay the estate of Terry Nation, because that still owns the copyright.
And they only have the rights to use the Daleks if they have them in one show a season.
Yeah. And, that's actually one of the big gripes that BBC had with Stephen Moffat, was because he kept overindulging and bringing back the Daleks, the Cybermen, all these classic Who villains that are owned by outside parties, whereas with Russell Davies, the reason you don't see a whole lot of his stuff anymore is because he maintains a copyright, and therefore they're not going to bring it back. So, BBC loves it when writers create something new, because then they can create money off it, but it's a one-off, and then, they don't bring it back again.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like a double-edged sword where, and then, that also applies again to the extended universe or Star Wars, where, the writers who actually wrote the novels, they did it possibly on commission, but they still technically have the copyright on specific characters they created.
Then there's also like screen production guild rules and writer rules. And like, okay, well, this guy has to get a production credit. And that means that they also have to get paid a certain amount of money because they created this character or they created this concept. It's a lot of stuff Disney doesn't want to get involved with.
Yeah, and so like I said, at this point, I'm not sure, if we're even going to see episode 9.
You're going to see it
because
too much money's been spent to get that off right now.
Right, but here's the thing: is based on the leaks, I mean, I don't see anyone going to see this. I mean, they're really going to have to start over from scratch, get a whole new screenplay, and get it written up as quickly as possible so that they can make their. Otherwise, they're going to have to push it back to like 2020 or 2021, because if they're trying to do one movie per year, which is this production line model, they're not going to be able to make that deadline, because at this point, the only way that they can salvage this is to start over from scratch.
Or Disney pulls somebody in to replace Kathleen Kennedy, and Disney more or less says, "Ding dong, the witch is dead," as a way to get publicity positive behind Star Wars to.
And they're still going to have to start over no matter what, because, again, one of the reasons why Solo was such a god-awful disaster was because, they brought in Ron Howard and had to reshoot most of the movie, but, they went with the same screenplay, because it takes months or sometimes years to develop a screenplay, and, they didn't have that if they were going to get a release date on time. But they really should have gone back and said, look, what we've got is unusable. The script is unusable. I think we can probably slap something together that's better than this. I mean, it would have been difficult. It might have involved pushing Solo back to maybe November or December, but I think it could have been done.
Also,
Ron Howard certainly would have had the talent to pull that off, but they forced him to keep going with the screenplay that they had.
Also, Solo was her way to get Lawrence Kasdan into The Force Awakens, to help really tighten that up. So that was Lawrence Kasdan's buy-in to the new Disney franchise model. Was, okay, we can do this, but I've always wanted to do a Han Solo movie.
Yeah, well, proof that writing talent doesn't necessarily get passed on.
And also...
Or maybe it skips a generation, I don't know.
Or maybe this is a case of, lightning in a bottle. George Lucas got it twice, and we're all just trying to see if we could get it in there a third time.
Yeah, and at this point, I don't think it will. And the biggest reason why they can't do it is because they've got people in charge who don't like Star Wars, think it was, flawed or imperfect. And, every movie's got its share of flaws, some more than others. But the reason Star Wars was so popular to begin with was because George Lucas got it right the first time. And for all his shortcomings as a storyteller, he still got a lot more right than he got wrong. And it came along at the right time and place, and, with the right resources to come together to create something that just worked.
Also, his wife was a brilliant editor who helped salvage the story as well in editing.
Yeah, because... certainly the dialogue was never going to save the movie.
No.
Yeah, I was watching a clip with Mark Hamill on YouTube back when he was on Johnny Carson, right when he was doing the promotion for Star Wars, and he was complaining about the dialogue, and there was a line that he begged George Lucas to cut from the Millennium Falcon scene when they arrive at Alderaan, and it's like, look, I can't say all this. I mean, who says all this stuff? So, fortunately, Lucas listened to reason, and, that line never got recorded. But still, I mean, even George Lucas, who, like I said, has a lot of shortcomings as a storyteller, still managed to get it right. But only because he had that passion for the material. And you can see in Star Wars, there's all sorts of influences going into that. And, but with Abrams or Johnson or pretty much most of the people writing now, they look at the material and they have nothing but contempt for it. They think, I mean, Moffat, for example, when he brought Moriarty in for Sherlock, decided, the original Moriarty was like this posh villain and very boring. It's like,
well, let's make him gay,
posh and boring.
Let's make him gay and crazy.
Which is. Yeah, and so I mean, and of course, it ended up being a complete train wreck. So, there's this sheer contempt for the material that's being taken.
See, I don't think it's so much contempt. I think they're embarrassed. I think they like Star Wars, and it goes back to an anecdote about the remastering George Lucas did, the special editions. I like the movie, but this one thing, and this one thing, and this one thing. They start cutting things out without realizing how that takes away from the whole.
Right, which to me is contempt, because you're basically saying, well, the original wasn't good enough, it needs tweaking, it needs to be modernized to make it even better. It's like, well, no, it doesn't. Okay, you're trying to fix what's not broken, and you don't try and fix what's not broken if you don't think it's broken. So
and somehow this drama is still not as stupid as the drama going over on at the CBS and Viacom, which is pretty stupid too, where they decided, hey, let's split our company into two companies, divide all our IP. Oh wait, we didn't make any money off of that. Let's merge our companies back together. Yeah, but I want to be in charge. No, I want to be in charge.
Yeah, and that brings us to our next episode, which will be dealing with CBS and Viacom and all the drama playing out. But it's getting late and actually getting really dark, because we're getting a thunderstorm here any second now, which will probably knock out the power. So, all right.
But Star Wars is always a top billing and good clickbait fodder.
Not anymore. At least not for top billing. Clickbait fodder, yeah. But yeah, we'll see. So, all right. So next episode, we're going to be discussing the CBS and Viacom merger, whether or not it'll happen, and speculate as to who might actually be in charge if it goes through. So this is...
If we're lucky, we'll get good Star Trek out of it.
One can only hope, but that only depends on Shari Redstone taking over, because she actually liked Star Trek, or at least respected it, whereas Les Moonves doesn't even know the difference between that and Star Wars, and had to be told by his wife. Like, okay, yeah. So, all right. So this is Michael Wilk and Larry Bernard.
Sayonara.
Take care. Good night. We're out.